The fluorescent lights of the Tech Venture Corp lobby hummed with their usual indifference, casting a pale, sickly glow over the marble floors that Maya Harrison was currently learning to polish. It was 7 o'clock on a Monday morning, and the building was still mostly empty, just the way she preferred it. She moved methodically across the expanse of stone, her earbuds playing a podcast about mindfulness she didn't really believe in, wearing grey coveralls with her name sewn into a patch. M. Roberts. Roberts, her mother's maiden name, safe, invisible. She had been working at Tech Venture Corp for exactly 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks she had perfected the art of being nobody. She arrived before everyone else, left after everyone else, and existed in the spaces between important people's lives. She was a ghost in a mop closet, which honestly was exactly what she needed after the particular brand of professional apocalypse that had consumed the last 6 months of her existence. Maya let the earbuds fall around her neck and paused mid-polish, catching her reflection in the gleaming marble. For a moment, just a moment, she saw the old version of herself, the woman in the tailored Burberry blazer, the one with the corner office and the standing invitation to every industry networking event in Manhattan. The woman whose name had trended on Twitter for all the wrong reasons. She looked away quickly and resumed polishing. The truth was, she had worked at Tech Venture Corp before. She had worked here when it mattered, when she had business cards and a salary that made her parents weep with pride, when she was the person who came up with the Forge Forward campaign that was supposed to triple user engagement and make the company's valuation skyrocket. The campaign that had been stolen, rebranded, and presented to the board by her colleague Richard Whitmore as his own idea. Except, that wasn't how the story had gone public. When the internal investigation happened, it had been messy and chaotic and utterly incompetent. Files were misplaced, witnesses gave contradictory statements, and somehow, through what could only be described as a perfect storm of corporate incompetence and Richard's particular brand of manipulative charm, the narrative had flipped. Maya had become the villain, the jealous employee who had tried to sabotage a colleague's work. The emails she had sent, celebrating her own ideas, had been framed as accusations. Her voice memos had been edited into nonsense. And by the time the truth tried to claw its way back to the surface, nobody was paying attention anymore. The internet had already decided who she was, so she had become someone else instead. Someone expendable, someone safe. The elevator doors chimed open and Maya's entire body went rigid. She wasn't supposed to be cleaning the lobby during the morning arrival. She had specifically requested the evening and early morning shifts, the dead hours when the building belonged to the cleaning crew and the insomniacs in the software division. But there had been a change in the schedule. Something about a special cleaning protocol for the new CEO's first official week, and here she was, caught in the liminal space between invisibility and exposure. The figure that emerged from the elevator was tall, expensive, and radiating the particular kind of exhaustion that only came from inheriting a failing company and having exactly zero idea how to save it. Ethan Foster. Maya had already seen his photo in the company memo announcing his appointment. She had seen it and felt absolutely nothing, which was how she had learned to feel about things now. Nothing was safer than something. Nothing didn't lead to betrayal or public humiliation or the complete and total dissolution of your professional identity. She kept her head down, focusing intently on a smudge that may or may not have existed on the marble floor. "Good morning," Ethan said, his voice carrying that particular New England accent that came standard with old money and Princeton degrees. He was walking toward the front desk, briefcase in one hand, a coffee cup from the bodega 3 blocks away in the other. He didn't look at Maya. Why would he? She was the help, except he stopped. Maya felt him stop. She didn't look up, but she felt it the way you feel someone's eyes on you in a dark room. The air shifted. The fluorescent light seemed to hum slightly louder. "You know," Ethan said, and his voice had changed. It was softer now, more curious. "That tile has been smudged for the entire time I've worked here, and I've never once seen anyone actually fix it. Most people just walk around it. But you're not walking around it. You're trying to fix it. Maya's hands went perfectly still on the microfiber cloth. This was bad. This was the opposite of invisible. This was the kind of attention that led to conversations, and conversations led to questions, and questions led to her carefully constructed lie collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. She looked up, keeping her expression neutral and her eyes unfocused. "Just doing my job, sir," she said, and her voice came out different, flatter, more accented, less like herself. It was a voice she had practiced, the voice of someone who went home to a studio apartment in Queens and watched reality television and never had opinions about quarterly earnings reports. Ethan Foster looked at her for a long moment. He was young for a CEO, probably mid-30s, with the kind of face that suggested he spent more time thinking about things than talking about them. His hair was dark and slightly messy, as if he had run his hands through it multiple times during an internal crisis. His suit was beautiful but wrinkled, Valentino probably, though he wore it like someone who had inherited most of his clothes from people who had cared more about fashion than he did. "Right," he said finally. "Well, good work with the tile." And then he was gone, walking toward the elevators that led to the executive floor, leaving behind only the ghost of his expensive cologne and Maya's racing heartbeat. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was fine. He had barely looked at her. He had no reason to recognize her. She was wearing coveralls and a mop closet smell, and her hair was in a ponytail, and she had deliberately made her face blank and forgettable. He was a CEO with a failing company and a trust fund, and approximately 9,000 more important things to worry about than the woman cleaning the lobby. She was invisible again. But as Maya went back to polishing the marble, something uncomfortable nagged at the back of her mind. Something about the way he had stopped, something about the way his eyes had moved across her face. Not searching exactly, but noticing, as if he had seen something that didn't quite fit the inventory of the world he expected. The rest of that Monday was blessedly uneventful. Maya cleaned the bathrooms on the 3rd floor, restocked the supply closet, emptied trash from the break room on the 15th floor, and managed to avoid any further interaction with Ethan Foster or anyone else remotely important. By the time evening fell and the building had emptied out, she felt her shoulders relax by fractions of an inch. She was in the mop closet, her favorite place, if she was being honest, which she tried not to be, when her phone buzzed. A text from her roommate Priya, who worked in graphic design at a startup in Brooklyn. "Coming home late. There's leftover curry in the fridge. Don't let anyone touch it." Maya smiled despite herself. Priya was the kind of person who had taken one look at Maya's carefully constructed lie and decided it was none of her business. They had met through a roommate matching app designed for people who couldn't afford to live alone in New York, and Priya had asked exactly 0 questions about why a woman with a master's degree in marketing was working as a janitor. She had simply accepted it as fact and moved on with her life, which was, in Maya's opinion, an extraordinarily kind thing to do. She was texting back, "Your curry is safe with me," when she heard voices in the hallway outside the closet. 2 people walking past. One of them was familiar. "I'm telling you, Richard, something feels off," Ethan Foster was saying. He sounded tired. "The product is solid. The market research supports the pivot, but the numbers don't add up, and the institutional knowledge here is spotty. It's like half the good ideas disappeared the same day that one executive left." Maya's blood went cold. She set her phone down very carefully on the shelf. "Which executive?" came another voice. "Richard Whitmore." Of course it was Richard Whitmore. The universe had an ironic sense of humor. "I don't know her name off the top of my head," Ethan said. "The scandal happened just before I got the job. I've been too busy trying to keep the company from sinking to get up to speed on the drama." "Oh, Maya Harrison," Richard said, and his voice was oily with the kind of satisfaction that came from successfully burying someone. "Brilliant strategist, absolutely brilliant, but the woman was unstable, jealous. She tried to claim credit for work that wasn't hers. It was a whole thing. Maya gripped the edge of the shelf so hard her knuckles went white. This was the lie that had destroyed her. This was the story that had been told and retold until it became fact, until every search result bore her name attached to words like fraud and unstable and liability. "Huh," Ethan said, and something in his tone suggested he was filing this information away. "And nobody thought to rehire her, bring her back once things stabilized?" "Are you joking?" Richard laughed. The woman disappeared. "Last I heard, she was doing, I don't know, bartending, couldn't find work in the industry, too much baggage." The voices faded as they walked further down the hallway, toward the executive conference room. Maya stood in the mop closet, surrounded by industrial-strength bleach and the ghost of her former life, and let herself feel something for the first time in 6 months. Rage. Pure, incandescent rage, and underneath it something more dangerous, hope, because Ethan Foster had sounded skeptical, and skepticism was the first crack in a carefully constructed lie, and cracks could expand, cracks could break things open. She sat down on the small stool in the corner of the closet, her hands shaking slightly, and tried to remember the woman she had been before the world had decided who she was. The following Wednesday, Maya had made a tactical error. She had been reorganizing the supply closet on the 23rd floor, alphabetizing cleaning products by brand and type, which was not technically part of her job, but which her anxious brain found deeply soothing. When she had heard footsteps approaching, she should have left immediately. She should have grabbed her cart and vanished into one of the empty conference rooms. Instead, she had frozen like an animal caught in headlights, which was precisely the moment Ethan Foster rounded the corner. "Ah," he said, stopping in the doorway. "The tile fixer. I never got your name." Maya's mouth had gone very dry. She was wearing her grey coveralls, her hair was in its standard utilitarian ponytail, and she had deliberately applied no makeup that morning, a practice she had adopted religiously since the scandal. Make yourself boring, she had learned. Make yourself forgettable. Make yourself the kind of person people's eyes slide right past. "M. Roberts," she said, pointing at her name patch as if he needed clarification on the pronunciation of a single syllable. "Right, M. Roberts." He leaned against the doorframe, holding a coffee cup from the good bodega this time, not the mediocre one from 3 blocks away. He had clearly been here long enough to develop opinions about coffee. "Tell me something, Monsieur Roberts. Have you worked in building management before this?" "No, sir," Maya said, which was technically true. She had never worked in building management. She had worked in marketing strategy and brand development and creative direction. Building management was her descent into a new stratosphere of existence. "That's what I thought," Ethan said, and something about his tone made her look up. His eyes were sharp, not unkind, but observant in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable, because most people who work in building management spend about 2 minutes organizing a supply closet. They'd get the job done and move on. But you're creating a system. Why? Maya's mind raced. She needed to give him an answer that would bore him into leaving. Something mundane. Something that required no follow-up. "Keeps things efficient," she said flatly. "When supplies are organized, you waste less time looking for things. Better for the company." Ethan tilted his head slightly, as if he was studying a painting he couldn't quite figure out. "Better for the company, not better for yourself, not faster for your shift, better for the company. Is that a problem, sir?" "No," he said, "it's just interesting." And then mercifully his phone buzzed. He pulled it out of his pocket, glanced at the screen, and his entire expression shifted into something more harried. "I need to take this. But, Monsieur Roberts, keep doing what you're doing with those tiles. The lobby looks better already." He walked away, phone pressed to his ear, already engaged in what sounded like a high-stakes conversation about quarterly projections and market share. Maya waited until his voice had completely faded before she let out the breath she had been holding. This was becoming a problem. By Friday, it had become a bigger problem. Maya had been mopping the hallway outside the executive conference room, a task she had initially tried to avoid, given that it required her to be in proximity to the senior leadership team during actual working hours. But the regular Friday afternoon deep clean required it, and she couldn't request schedule changes without drawing attention. So here she was, methodically working her way down the corridor while the executive team had their weekly meeting visible through the glass walls of the conference room. She had learned to exist in a state of deliberate invisibility during these moments. Eyes down, movements mechanical, no sudden sounds or gestures that might make someone actually notice her presence. She was a piece of furniture, a background detail, part of the architecture of the building rather than a person existing within it. She was doing so well at this strategy until Richard Whitmore decided to have a complete and utter meltdown. "This is insane," he was saying, his voice carrying through the glass walls with the kind of volume that only came from someone who was used to his anger being treated as valid feedback. He was standing up, gesturing expansively, his face flushed with what Maya recognized as indignation masquerading as passion. "We've already invested significant resources into the Forge Forward campaign. We can't just pivot now. It's my strategy. It's going to work." Maya's hands went still on her mop handle. Ethan was sitting at the head of the table, his expression carefully neutral. "The data suggests otherwise, Richard. User engagement with the Forge Forward campaign is underperforming by 17% compared to our projections. We need to cut our losses and reallocate resources to something with more traction." "The data is wrong," Richard snapped, "or whoever analyzed it was incompetent." "The data was analyzed by 3 separate teams," Ethan said, his voice patient in that particular way that suggested he was running out of patience very quickly. "And it all points to the same conclusion. The campaign isn't working. We need to move on. You want to know why the data looks bad?" Richard was pacing now, his hands clenched into fists. "Because the original strategic vision for that campaign was compromised from the beginning. The woman who came up with it, Ethan interrupted, and there was something dangerous in his tone now, "is not here to defend her work. So let's focus on what we can actually control." Maya realized, with a kind of numb horror, that she had stopped pretending to work. She was standing completely still, holding the mop handle, listening with every fiber of her being to a conversation that was fundamentally about her, except nobody in that room knew it, except, possibly, Ethan Foster. He had glanced in her direction, not at her directly, but toward the hallway, toward the windows, toward the space where she existed. And there was something in that glance that suggested he was doing some kind of internal calculation. "Regardless," Ethan continued, pulling Richard's attention back to the table, "the decision has been made. We're pivoting to the new engagement model. You'll have until end of day Monday to hand over all the documentation for the Forge Forward campaign to the transition team." "This is a mistake," Richard said coldly. "You're making a mistake." "Probably," Ethan said. "I'm new at this. I make a lot of mistakes, but I make them based on data, not on personal attachment to ideas. It's one of my few endearing qualities." The meeting continued, but Maya had stopped listening. She went back to mopping, her movements now jerky and imprecise. Her mind was spinning, running through the implications of what she had just witnessed. The Forge Forward campaign had been declared a failure. By the actual data, not by Richard's reframing or by whoever had been manipulating the narrative for the past 6 months. By cold, hard numbers that existed independent of corporate politics and personal vendettas, which meant the lie was starting to crack. When the meeting ended, most of the executives filed out in clusters, engaged in the kind of low-level conversations that happened after contentious decisions. Richard stormed past without looking at anyone. But Ethan took his time, gathering his papers, his expression thoughtful, And then he looked directly at Maya. She had not expected this. She had been trained through 6 months of careful practice not to be looked at directly, to exist in peripheral vision, to be the kind of person that people's eyes glossed right over. But Ethan Foster was looking at her the way someone might look at a puzzle they were trying to solve. "Monsieur Roberts," he said, walking over to her, "question for you. Do you think people can change their minds?" It was such an unusual question that Maya was caught completely off guard. "About what, sir?" "About anything, everything. People they've misjudged, ideas they've dismissed too quickly. Do you think people can actually change their minds, or do they just get more committed to their original position?" Maya thought about 6 months of her life. She thought about people who had believed her briefly, before the narrative had shifted, and they had believed the opposite instead. She thought about how quickly conviction could transform into doubt once the story changed. "I think people can change their minds," she said carefully, "but usually only when they have a reason to, when the evidence is compelling enough, when someone they trust tells them to." Ethan nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he had already suspected. "Thank you, Monsieur Roberts, that's helpful." He walked away, leaving her standing in the hallway with her mop and her racing heartbeat and the growing certainty that something was shifting. Something was changing. The careful architecture of her invisibility was developing cracks, and through those cracks, light was beginning to leak in. That evening, Maya sat on the edge of her bed in the studio apartment she shared with Priya, staring at her laptop screen. Priya was out, as she usually was on Friday nights, at some gallery opening in Williamsburg that probably served expensive wine and low-quality cheese. Maya had the apartment to herself, which meant she could do the things she had been avoiding for 6 months. She opened a search engine and typed her own name. The results were still damning. There were articles about the scandal, think pieces about corporate fraud, Reddit threads analyzing her supposed psychological instability. Her LinkedIn profile was still public, still frozen in time at the moment her career had ended, still listing Tech Venture Corp as her last position with no explanation of her departure. But buried in the search results, almost unnoticed, was a small article from a tech industry blog. It was dated 3 weeks ago, just around the time Ethan Foster had taken over as CEO. Tech Venture Corp pivot. Emerging evidence suggests internal campaign sabotage. The article was short, speculative, and mostly ignored by the larger media ecosystem. But it was there. It was a crack in the narrative. Someone, somewhere, had started asking questions. Someone had decided that the original story didn't quite add up. Maya clicked on the article. The author's name was unfamiliar to her. Jennifer Walsh, a freelance tech journalist. The piece referenced unnamed sources within the company and internal investigations that may have been mishandled. It was cautious, hedged with qualifiers, but it was asking the right questions. It was the beginning of something. Maya closed her laptop before hope could fully bloom in her chest. Hope was dangerous. Hope was what had gotten her into this situation in the first place. Hope that her talent and hard work would be recognized, that her ideas would matter, that the world would recognize truth when it was presented clearly. But maybe, she thought, as she lay back on her bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling of her studio apartment in Queens, maybe hope wasn't completely useless yet. Maybe the girl who had been erased was starting to become real again. Monday morning arrived with the kind of grey, oppressive weather that only New York in late October could produce. The sky hung low over Manhattan like a threat, and the wind had that particular quality that made everyone walk faster and speak less. Maya was in her usual spot, the lobby, 7 o'clock, polishing marble that had not needed polishing since Friday, when she noticed something different. There was a woman in the lobby who did not belong there. She was probably in her mid-40s, with the kind of sharp, no-nonsense demeanor that came from years of professional authority. She wore a charcoal blazer and carried a leather briefcase, and she was studying the directory of company offices with the focused intensity of someone on a mission. Maya kept her head down, but something in her nervous system was on high alert. This woman had the energy of an investigator. "Excuse me," the woman said, and Maya's stomach dropped. She was talking to Maya. "Do you know where I can find Richard Whitmore's office?" 25th floor, Maya heard herself say. "East wing. You'll need to check in with reception." "Thank you," the woman said, and then, pausing, "Have you worked here long?" 3 weeks, Maya said. The woman nodded, as if filing this information away. "And you seem to know the building well." "It's my job to know the building," Maya said, keeping her voice flat and unremarkable. The woman smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who was about to make someone else's day significantly worse. "Well, thank you for your help, Monsieur Roberts." She had read the name patch. Of course she had. Everyone read the name patch eventually. It was the only acknowledgement that Maya existed as a functioning human being in their world. The woman walked toward the elevators, her heels clicking against the marble with a decisive rhythm. Maya watched her go, her hands resuming their automatic motion across the floor, and tried to convince herself that whatever was about to happen had nothing to do with her. She was lying to herself. She had become very good at lying to herself. By Wednesday afternoon, the lobby had become an informal gathering place for whispers. Maya, restocking paper towels in the men's bathroom on the 18th floor, overheard 2 senior managers discussing the situation in low, urgent voices. "External audit team," one of them was saying, "brought in by Foster himself. They're reviewing the entire Forge Forward project from inception." "Why would he do that?" the other voice responded. "The campaign's already dead. Why dig into it? Because something about the original sabotage narrative doesn't add up. Because Richard's been lying about something. Because Foster's actually smart enough to realize that a campaign doesn't just fail. Someone had to actively mismanage it." Maya's hands went still on the paper towel dispenser. By Thursday, it was impossible to ignore. The audit team had set up a temporary office on the 24th floor. They were reviewing files, conducting interviews, reconstructing the timeline of the Forge Forward campaign from its conception to its failure. The rumor mill, that ancient and terrifyingly accurate source of corporate information, had settled on a consensus. Richard Whitmore was in serious trouble. And somewhere in that mess of reopened investigations and external scrutiny, the truth about what had actually happened 6 months ago was trying very hard to claw its way back into the light. Maya tried not to think about it. She really did. But the more she tried not to think about it, the more it consumed every waking moment of her consciousness. On Friday evening, she was cleaning the executive hallway again when Ethan Foster emerged from his office, looking significantly worse for wear. His tie was undone. His hair was in full chaos mode. He had the expression of someone who had spent the entire day confirming suspicions he had preferred to remain suspicious about. He saw her and stopped. "M. Roberts," he said, and there was something different in his voice now. Something harder. "Do you have a minute?" This was it. This was the moment where her carefully constructed lie was going to collapse, where she would be exposed as a fraud, where everything she had carefully rebuilt would crumble into dust. "Of course, sir," she said, setting down her mop. He gestured for her to follow him into his office. The executive suite was exactly as she had imagined it would be. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, expensive furniture that looked like it had been chosen by someone who cared more about comfort than show, and on the desk, a thick folder marked "Confidential." "Sit," Ethan said, gesturing to one of the chairs across from his desk. Maya sat, her hands folded carefully in her lap, her expression neutral. She had become an expert at neutral expressions. "I'm going to tell you something," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair and studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "And I want you to know that I have spent the last 4 days confirming it through multiple independent sources, so please don't insult my intelligence by lying to me. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir," Maya whispered. The Forge Forward campaign was conceived and developed by a woman named Maya Harrison. The strategic framework, the messaging approach, the entire creative vision, it was all hers. Richard Whitmore took credit for it, and when questions started to arise, he systematically destroyed her professional reputation by claiming that she was the one engaging in fraud and sabotage. By all accounts, it worked spectacularly well. She disappeared. The narrative solidified, and nobody questioned it because the lie was told confidently enough that it became truth. Maya's entire body had gone very still. What's interesting, Ethan continued, is that a woman matching her description started working here 3 weeks ago, under a false name, in a position so far beneath her skill level that it would be funny if it weren't so depressing. And that same woman has demonstrated on multiple occasions the exact kind of strategic thinking and problem-solving that characterized the Forge Forward campaign. "Sir," Maya started, but Ethan held up a hand. "I'm not finished. You're going to sit there and listen, and then you're going to decide whether you want to keep lying to me or whether you want to tell me the truth. Because I have a choice to make, and your answer is going to determine what I do with it." Maya's heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it across the desk. The audit team has confirmed that Richard actively sabotaged the campaign in the final stages of development. They found emails, they found documentation. They found proof that he deliberately altered market research data to make the campaign look worse than it actually was. The entire thing was planned to make you look incompetent and to position himself as the problem solver who could fix it. He was going to take credit for the rescue, which would have made him look like a hero. Ethan opened the confidential folder on his desk. Inside were printed emails, spreadsheets, and what looked like dozens of pages of documentation. He slid a specific email across the desk toward her. It was an email from 6 months ago, from Richard to a contact at a media firm. "Need you to make sure the narrative sticks. If anyone asks, the campaign was always her idea. She was always incompetent. Make sure the story is consistent across all outlets." Maya stared at it, and something inside her chest that had been locked down for 6 months suddenly burst open. "I didn't know," Ethan said quietly. "When I took this job, I didn't know any of this. I was too busy trying to keep the company from sinking. But last week, when you looked at the mop closet like it was a problem that needed solving instead of just a task to complete, I started to wonder. And when you talked about changing minds, when you quoted data like you understood strategic methodology instinctively, I started asking questions." He paused, and his eyes were surprisingly gentle. "Are you Maya Harrison?" The moment stretched between them like taffy. Maya could feel the crossroads, could feel the choice crystallizing in front of her. She could continue lying. She could maintain the fiction of Monsieur Roberts and fade back into invisibility. Or she could step back into her own life and risk everything. "Yes," she whispered. And then louder, "Yes, I'm Maya Harrison." Ethan nodded as if he had already known this, as if the confirmation was just a formality. "Good. Here's what's going to happen. The audit team is filing a formal complaint with the state licensing board about Richard's conduct. There's going to be a full investigation into the original claims against you. And I'm going to recommend your immediate reinstatement to your former position, with full back pay and a formal apology from the company." "You don't have to," Maya started. "I do, actually," Ethan interrupted, "because I'm the CEO, and I have the authority to make decisions based on facts rather than narratives, and the facts are very clear. You were right, Richard was wrong, and you deserve to have your reputation restored." He closed the confidential folder and slid it across the desk toward her. "But here's what I need from you. I need you to be willing to cooperate with the investigation. I need you to be willing to stand up and confirm your role in the campaign's creation. And I need you to understand that this is going to be ugly, Because Richard is going to fight, and there are going to be people who prefer the lie to the truth. Maya looked at the folder, at the evidence of her vindication, at the path back to her own life, and she thought about the last 6 months. She thought about the weight of invisibility, the cost of silence, the particular kind of pain that came from knowing the truth and having no power to change anything. "I'll do it," she said. "Good," Ethan said. He stood up and extended his hand across the desk. "Welcome back, Maya Harrison. We have a lot of work to do." She took his hand, and it was warm and solid and real, and for the first time in 6 months she felt like she existed. Later, when Maya had left his office and was walking down the hallway in a state of numb shock, she became aware that Ethan had followed her out. "Maya," he said, catching up to her near the elevators. "One more thing." She turned around, still holding the confidential folder like it might evaporate if she didn't maintain constant physical contact with it. "I want you to know that I didn't figure this out because I'm particularly brilliant," he said. "I figured it out because you were the kind of person who organized supply closets for the benefit of the company, not for yourself. Because you cared about things that didn't directly affect you. That's not something you can fake. That's the kind of integrity that doesn't disappear just because the world decides it doesn't see you anymore." He paused, and for a moment his expression shifted into something less professional, something that looked almost like vulnerability. "I also want you to know that I'm going to need a new director of strategic development, and I have a very strong suspicion that you might be interested in that position. But I'm not going to ask you today. I'm going to let you process everything. And then, in a few weeks, when you've had time to figure out what you actually want, I'm going to ask you properly. And you're going to say yes because you're going to realize that the company actually needs you, and that this time it's going to work out differently." He was looking at her with that same intense, observant gaze he had turned on her from the first day, and Maya realized, with a kind of electric clarity, that she had completely misunderstood what that gaze meant. It had never been skepticism. It had been recognition. "Thank you," she said, and it came out smaller than she had intended. "You're welcome," Ethan said. "Now go home. Get some rest. You have a big week ahead of you." The following Monday morning, Maya Harrison walked into the Tech Venture Corp lobby, not through the service entrance, but through the front doors. She was wearing a charcoal blazer, not the one from her old life, because that had been donated to Goodwill months ago in a moment of self-destructive catharsis, but something similar enough that it meant something. Her hair was down. Her makeup was deliberate. She existed, fully and completely, in the world again. The receptionist, a young man named Marcus, whom she had cleaned up after for 3 weeks without being acknowledged, did a double take. "Miss Harrison," he said, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Good morning, Marcus," she said, and smiled at him properly for the first time since she had started working at the company. "I'll be heading up to the executive floor." She took the elevator alone, watching the numbers climb, and tried to steady her breathing. Everything was different now. Everything was the same. The contradictions sat uncomfortably in her chest. The executive floor was quieter than she had expected. It was 8:45 in the morning, a time when important people were usually either in meetings or performing the theater of looking busy. But when she reached Ethan's office, she found him at his desk, coffee in hand, reading something on his computer with the kind of intense focus that suggested the contents were either very important or very infuriating. He looked up when she knocked on the open door. "Maya," he said, and there was genuine pleasure in his voice. He stood up. "I wasn't expecting you until 9. Come in. Sit." She sat in the same chair where she had learned the truth about her own life. It felt both familiar and entirely foreign. "How are you feeling?" Ethan asked, settling back into his own chair. "Terrified," Maya said honestly. It was easier to be honest now that the fundamental lie had been exposed. "I spent 6 months being invisible. It's strange to be visible again." "That makes sense," Ethan said. He picked up a thick folder from his desk, not the confidential one from before, but something new, something official. I wanted to walk you through the timeline of what's going to happen over the next few weeks. The audit team will be concluding their investigation by end of this week. The formal complaint against Richard will be filed on Friday. We've already begun the process of notifying relevant media outlets about the findings, so the narrative is going to shift. It's going to be public, and it's going to be messy, and you're going to receive a lot of attention that you probably don't want. Will Richard be fired? Maya asked. Richard will be fired, sued by the company for the damages his sabotage caused, and almost certainly blacklisted from the industry, Ethan said matter-of-factly. Which is exactly what should happen, but it's also going to mean that the industry will be paying very close attention to your story. You're going to be the victim in a corporate fraud narrative. The media loves that. Maya nodded slowly, processing this. Part of her, a part she was not entirely proud of, wanted to savor Richard's destruction. But mostly, she just felt tired. Tired of being a narrative. Tired of being a story that other people told about themselves. What I'm proposing, Ethan continued, is that we get ahead of this. Rather than waiting for the media to do their thing, we conduct our own investigation into what happened with the Forge Forward campaign. We document everything. We show the strategic thinking that went into it, the innovation, the reasons it would have succeeded if it hadn't been actively sabotaged. And we position you not as a victim, but as a professional who was wronged and who deserves to have her work recognized. You want me to justify my own campaign, Maya said. I want you to reclaim it, Ethan corrected. There's a difference. This isn't about defending yourself against accusations. It's about taking back ownership of something that belongs to you. He opened the folder and turned it toward her. Inside were dozens of documents, the original strategic briefs, the market research she had conducted, the creative framework she had developed, her own ideas returning to her like ghosts. I want you to work with me on this, Ethan said, not as a cleaning staff member, obviously, but as the Director of Strategic Development. Officially, you would have been promoted to this position 6 months ago if circumstances had been different. Unofficially, you were always doing the work. Now we're just making it legal. What's the salary? Maya asked, which was a practical question and entirely unsexy. But she had learned that practicality was a form of power. Ethan named a figure that was roughly double what she had been making before her life had imploded. Plus back pay for the time you spent working as a custodian, which the company is legally obligated to provide as part of the settlement we're going to negotiate. Settlement, Maya echoed. You're going to sue the company, Ethan said calmly. Not because they're evil. The company itself didn't sabotage you, Richard did, but because the company failed in its duty of care when they didn't properly investigate the original allegations. They accepted Richard's narrative without verification. They allowed a false accusation to destroy an employee's career. That's actionable. And while you're going to eventually drop the suit, the fact that it exists creates a legal framework for the settlement that makes all of this official and binding. Maya stared at him. You've thought about this very carefully. I have a Harvard MBA and a trust fund, Ethan said with a slight smile. I can think about things carefully. It's one of the few advantages of being born with money. You get good at legal strategy because there's always someone trying to sue you. Despite everything, despite the shock and the terror and the strangeness of stepping back into her own life, Maya found herself laughing. What? Ethan asked, his expression shifting into something more curious. Nothing, she said. It's just, you're absurdly good at this, at figuring out how to fix things. I didn't expect that. Why not? He asked. Because most CEOs I've encountered are just sophisticated con artists, Maya said. They're good at talking about strategy, but they don't actually care about execution. They care about looking good and making money. But you actually care about fixing things. I don't want the company to fail, Ethan said, and there was something almost vulnerable in the way he said it. When I took this job, I had no idea what I was doing. My father had run this company for 30 years, and it was successful because he was good at it. I'm running it because I inherited it, which is not the same thing at all. I'm genuinely terrified that I'm going to destroy something that took my father a lifetime to build." He paused and his voice got quieter. "When I realized what had happened to you, when I figured out that someone had deliberately sabotaged a good idea to cover up their own incompetence, something in me just broke, because I realized that the same thing could happen here, that I could make the wrong call, believe the wrong person, and destroy someone's entire career without even meaning to." "But you didn't," Maya said. "You questioned it, you investigated, you found the truth. Because you were here," Ethan said. "Because even after 6 months of being erased, you were still the kind of person who cared about things that weren't directly about you. That's what made me notice you in the first place. That's what made me realize something didn't add up." He was looking at her the way he had looked at her in the hallway outside his office, the way that made it very clear that the professional distance between them was rapidly becoming a problem. "We should probably discuss professional boundaries," Maya said carefully. "Probably," Ethan agreed. "But I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not very good at maintaining professional boundaries when I'm genuinely interested in someone, and I'm genuinely interested in you. So here's what I'm suggesting. We focus on work for the next month or so. We get you re-established as the Director of Strategic Development. We resolve the legal situation with Richard. We let the media narrative settle down. And then, when things are less chaotic, we have a conversation about whether there might be something between us beyond professional respect and mutual admiration." "That's a very reasonable suggestion," Maya said. "I'm full of reasonable suggestions," Ethan said. "It's my most annoying quality." The following weeks unfolded with the kind of whirlwind intensity that only corporate crisis management could produce. The audit team concluded their investigation on Friday. The formal complaint against Richard was filed with the appropriate regulatory bodies, and by Monday morning, the story had broken across the tech industry media landscape like a carefully orchestrated explosion. Tech Venture Corp executives sabotaged colleagues' work in bid for career advancement. Female director's career destroyed by deliberate campaign of fraud and defamation. How a brilliant marketing strategy became a cautionary tale of corporate corruption. The articles were detailed, sourced, and increasingly sympathetic to Maya's position. Her photograph, her real photograph, not the unflattering screenshots that had circulated 6 months ago, appeared in several major publications. She became, somewhat against her will, a symbol of corporate injustice and the importance of due diligence. It was exhausting. It was also, she had to admit, vindicating. Priya, her roommate, had nearly fainted when she saw Maya's name in the Wall Street Journal. "You were a marketing director," she had screamed. "Why didn't you tell me? Why were you cleaning my apartment?" "I wasn't cleaning your apartment," Maya had pointed out. "We have a cleaning service that comes on Thursdays." "You understand what I mean," Priya had said. "This is insane. You're like famous now. On LinkedIn, everyone's sharing articles about you. People are tagging you in comments about corporate ethics." The publicity was helpful, though. When Maya finally agreed to an interview with Jennifer Walsh, the freelance journalist who had been the first to question the original narrative, it positioned her not as a victim seeking justice, but as a professional whose work had been stolen and who was now reclaiming her intellectual property. The interview went live on a Thursday, and by Friday morning, 3 separate companies had reached out asking if she would consider consulting opportunities. She declined all of them. She was staying at Tech Venture Corp. By the 3rd week of November, the legal situation had largely been resolved. Richard Whitmore had been terminated and was currently engaged in negotiations with the company's lawyers. The settlement with Maya was in its final stages. A number in a bank account that represented 6 months of her life converted into currency. The Forge Forward campaign had been officially credited to her, and the company had issued a public apology for the handling of the original allegations. And on a cold Friday evening, when most of the building had emptied out and the lights of Manhattan glittered like promises, Ethan Foster knocked on the door of her new office. The office was on the executive floor. It had windows. It had a view. It had her name on the door in letters that she kept stopping to touch just to verify they were real. "Come in," she said. Ethan entered, holding 2 glasses and a bottle of expensive-looking wine. "I thought we might celebrate," he said. "Celebrate what?" Maya asked, though she suspected she knew. "The first month of your reinstatement. The fact that Richard is probably having an extremely bad week. The fact that you've already developed 3 new strategic frameworks that are going to double our user engagement. The fact that you're still here, and you're still brilliant, and the world is finally acknowledging both of those things." He poured 2 glasses and handed her one. They clinked them together in a small, private toast. "There's something else I want to celebrate," he said quietly. "The fact that you didn't let the world's narrative about you become your narrative. You stayed yourself even when nobody was looking. That's not easy. That's actually extraordinarily difficult." "I had help," Maya said. "You had help. You could have just fired me the moment you figured out who I was. You could have called security and had me escorted out for fraud, but you didn't. You chose to believe that the truth mattered." "The truth always matters," Ethan said. "Eventually. It just usually takes longer than we want it to." He was standing very close to her now, and the professional distance that they had carefully maintained for the past month was rapidly becoming a theoretical concept rather than an actual reality. "I know we said we'd wait," he said, "but I'm terrible at waiting. And I've been trying very hard not to think about the fact that you're brilliant and stubborn and genuinely kind, and that you look at problems the way I wish I could look at them, seeing the solution before anyone else even realizes there's a problem." "Ethan," Maya started, but he held up a hand. "I'm not asking for an answer right now," he said. "I'm just telling you how I feel, so that when you're ready, you know exactly what we're talking about." He set down his glass and walked toward the door, leaving her standing there with her wine and the particular kind of emotional vertigo that came from someone laying their heart out in front of you. "For what it's worth," he said, pausing in the doorway, "I think you're going to be extraordinary in this role. Not just because you're talented, but because you actually care about doing things right. This company is lucky to have you back." And then he was gone, leaving her alone in her office, with the view of Manhattan, and the knowledge that sometimes, if you were very lucky, the world would give you a second chance at your own life. And sometimes, if you were extraordinarily lucky, it would also give you the possibility of something new. December arrived in New York with the kind of aggressive cold that made people walk faster and speak less. The city transformed into something sharper, colder, more beautiful in its brutality. Ice formed on the edges of window panes. The streets smelled like salt and car exhaust, and the particular desperation of people trying to get somewhere warm. And in the offices of Tech Venture Corp, the holiday season meant one thing: the annual strategy meeting where the company's leadership presented their year-end projections and next-year initiatives to the board of directors. Maya had been told approximately 17 times that she did not need to attend this meeting. Ethan had suggested, delicately, that it might be overwhelming given everything she had been through. But the point of reclaiming her career, she had decided, was to do the things that terrified her. So on a Tuesday morning in early December, she walked into the boardroom, wearing a dress that cost more than a week's salary from her previous life. And she sat down at the table where Richard Whitmore had once sat, where she had once dreamed of sitting, where she now belonged. The board members filed in slowly. They were mostly men, mostly over 60, mostly the kind of people who had made their money when the internet was still a novelty and had somehow managed to maintain relevance despite having no actual understanding of how modern technology worked. They greeted Ethan with the kind of respectful distance that suggested they had decided to trust him despite their better instincts. And when they got to Maya, they did a double take. Ms. Harrison, the board chair, a man named Gerald Sinclair, who had been with the company since its inception, said warmly, "Welcome back. We've heard quite a lot about your work these past few weeks." "Thank you, Mr. Sinclair," Maya said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his expression genuinely pleased. She had been prepared for skepticism. She had not been prepared for warmth. The meeting began. Ethan presented the company's quarterly results, which were actually looking better than anyone had expected. The pivot away from the Forge Forward campaign had been successful. The new engagement model was outperforming projections by 12%. The user base was growing. The company's valuation had stabilized. And then it was Maya's turn to present. She stood up, connected her laptop to the presentation system, and felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came from being in front of an audience of people whose opinions mattered. This was what she had been born to do. This was the part of herself that had been buried, erased, rendered invisible by the machinery of corporate betrayal. "Thank you for the opportunity to present," she said, and her voice was steady. "I want to talk today about the strategic direction for user engagement over the next 18 months. But before I do that, I need to address something." She paused, looking out at the faces of the board members. Gerald Sinclair was watching her with the kind of careful attention that suggested he knew something significant was about to happen. "6 months ago, a strategy that I developed was deliberately sabotaged by a colleague seeking to advance his own career," Maya said calmly. "The company did not investigate this thoroughly. A false narrative was accepted without verification, and an employee's career was destroyed as a result. I'm not bringing this up to assign blame to this organization. I'm bringing it up because I want to be clear about what I believe about strategy, about innovation, and about the responsibility that comes with being in positions of leadership." She clicked to the next slide, which showed the original Forge Forward campaign architecture. This campaign was built on a specific principle that user engagement increases when you make people feel like they're part of something meaningful, not something trendy, something that actually matters to them, something that has integrity. That principle was sound then, and it's sound now, and it's going to form the foundation of everything we do moving forward. She spent the next 45 minutes walking the board through her strategic vision. She showed them data. She showed them market research. She showed them the original framework for Forge Forward. And she explained exactly why it would have worked if it hadn't been actively sabotaged. She showed them the new engagement model, which was built on the same principles but adapted for the current market conditions. And when she finished, the room was silent. Gerald Sinclair was the first to speak. "That was extraordinary, Ms. Harrison. You clearly have a sophisticated understanding of both the market and the human psychology that drives consumer behavior." "Thank you," Maya said, and sat down. The rest of the meeting proceeded without incident. By the time it ended, Maya had been offered and politely declined a seat on the board's strategic committee. She had also been congratulated repeatedly by people who had apparently decided that her reinstatement was not just okay, but actually good for the company. It was validating. It was also, somewhat distressingly, anticlimactic. Ethan caught up with her in the hallway after the meeting. "That was brilliant," he said without preamble. "You completely disarmed them by acknowledging the elephant in the room. Nobody was expecting you to do that." "I needed them to know that I'm not afraid of what happened," Maya said. "Fear looks like weakness in that room. And weakness is contagious. I wasn't going to let it define me." "That's very mature and emotionally evolved," Ethan said. "It's also terrifying. You basically just told the board that the company failed to do its due diligence and got away with it." "I also told them that I'm the kind of person who doesn't hold grudges against organizations for things that individuals did to me," Maya pointed out, "which is true, and which should make me look like the kind of employee who is secure in her skills and therefore worth keeping around." Ethan smiled. You're very manipulative when you want to be. I respect that. Thank you, Maya said. It's a learned skill. They walked together toward the executive floor, and somewhere around the 22nd floor, Ethan's expression shifted into something more serious. I know we said we'd wait, he said, but I need to tell you something, and I can't keep waiting to tell it. I'm aware that this is terrible timing and completely professional suicide, but I've never been very good at doing things the conventional way. They had reached the executive floor. Ethan guided her into his office and closed the door behind them. I'm in love with you, he said simply. I have been since the moment I realized who you were, which was about 5 minutes after I met you. I spent weeks trying to convince myself that what I was feeling was professional admiration mixed with the satisfaction of solving a puzzle. But it's not. It's just love. It's the kind of love that makes me want to protect you and also wants to give you complete autonomy to make your own decisions, which is probably a contradiction, but that's what it is. Maya stared at him. You're not supposed to say things like that, she said finally. I know, Ethan agreed, but you just gave a presentation about the importance of integrity to a room full of board members, and I realize that if I'm going to make the case that integrity matters, I need to actually have some. Which means telling you the truth instead of waiting for some perfect moment that's probably never going to come. Ethan, this is complicated, Maya said. We work together. We have a professional relationship. If things go wrong, it could affect both of our careers. I know, he said again, and I'm prepared for that risk because what I feel is more important to me than my career. But I also want you to understand that I'm not asking for anything right now. I'm just asking for the possibility of something. I'm asking you to know how I feel so that when you're ready, you can decide what you want to do with that information. He was standing very close to her now, close enough that she could see the faint lines around his eyes, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive and slightly vanilla, something that had become familiar to her over the past month. I need to think about this, Maya said. Of course, Ethan said. He stepped back, restoring professional distance. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. That evening, Maya sat in her apartment in Queens and had a minor existential crisis. Priya found her staring out the window at the street below, where people were rushing home from work, or rushing out to dinner, or rushing toward whatever their lives required of them. You look like you're about to cry or commit a felony, Priya observed, sitting down on the couch next to her. What happened? Ethan Foster told me he's in love with me, Maya said flatly. Priya made a sound like a very satisfied cat. Oh, my God, that's wonderful. Why do you look like someone told you that your dog ate your entire paycheck? Because it's a terrible idea, Maya said. Because I just got my career back. Because if this goes wrong, it could destroy everything I've spent the past month rebuilding. Or, Priya said carefully, it could be the best thing that's ever happened to you. Have you considered that possibility? No, Maya said. Because the best thing that's ever happened to me before was my career, and that turned out to be a lie built on someone else's theft and corruption. That wasn't your career's fault, Priya said. That was Richard Whitmore's fault. Your career was solid. The work you did was good. The only thing that changed was the narrative about who did the work. Maya turned to look at her roommate. When did you become so wise? I was always wise, Priya said. You were just too busy being invisibly traumatized to notice. But listen, I've watched you for the past month be amazing at your job. I've watched you reclaim your professional identity. I've watched you become the person you were supposed to be. And you've done all of that while you were also clearly falling in love with your CEO, which is the most predictable romantic comedy plot I've ever witnessed. I haven't been falling in love with him, Maya said. You literally have, Priya said. You talk about him constantly. You notice things about him, like the way he runs his hands through his hair when he's anxious, or how he actually listens when people talk to him instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. You dress better now because you want to look nice at work, which is definitely about him. I could go on, but I think you understand my point." Maya did understand the point. She understood it in the way that made her want to deny it very firmly, and then go sit quietly in her room and think about nothing for several hours. "What if I'm not ready?" she asked. "Then you tell him that," Priya said. "And he waits. Or you work through your trauma in therapy like a normal person, and then you tell him you're ready. But Maya, you don't get to hide forever. You already tried that, and it was terrible. You don't have to jump into a relationship with Ethan Foster tomorrow, but you also don't have to run away from the possibility just because the last time you trusted someone, they betrayed you." The following week was a study in emotional avoidance. Maya threw herself into her work with the kind of intensity that usually indicated a person was trying very hard not to feel anything. She developed 3 new strategic frameworks. She conducted market research. She worked with the product team to implement changes that would improve user engagement. She did everything except go to any of the company holiday events where she might run into Ethan in a social setting. This was a mistake, because on Friday afternoon, the Friday before the company holiday party, Ethan showed up at her office with 2 cups of hot chocolate and a proposition. "I know you're avoiding me," he said, setting one of the cups on her desk. "I'm not avoiding you," Maya said, which was an obvious lie. "I'm just very busy." "You're avoiding me," Ethan repeated, "and I understand why. You've been hurt before. Trust is difficult. All of that makes sense. But I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. And when you're ready to have a conversation about this, I'm ready to have it. I'm not going to pressure you. I'm not going to make this weird at work, but I'm also not going to pretend I don't feel what I feel." He was holding his own cup of hot chocolate, looking at her with an expression of such patient understanding that it actually made her angry. "Stop being so reasonable," she said. "Stop being so perfect. It's making this harder." "Making what harder?" Ethan asked. "Everything," Maya said. "My job is hard enough. Reclaiming my career is hard enough. Getting back to a place where I trust people is hard enough. And now I have to also figure out whether I have feelings for you, and whether those feelings are real, or whether they're just gratitude for you believing me when everyone else didn't." "Fair," Ethan said. He took a sip of his hot chocolate. "For what it's worth, I don't think you owe me an answer on any timeline. I'm not asking you to figure this out. I'm just asking you to know that the possibility exists." "What if I decide I don't want that possibility?" Maya asked. "What if I decide that a relationship with my CEO is a terrible idea?" "Then I respect that decision," Ethan said. "And we continue working together, and we're professional, and things are slightly awkward for a while. And then, eventually, they're not awkward anymore. People survive worse." He set his cup down and stood up to leave. "Come to the holiday party tomorrow," he said. "Not because you have to see me, but because you've earned the right to be there as an equal instead of invisible. And because your colleagues actually like you, and because you deserve to celebrate the fact that you survived the worst thing that's happened to you and came out the other side, still yourself." He left before she could respond. And she sat in her office with her hot chocolate growing cold, thinking about what it meant to be trusted by someone who had no obligation to trust her, and what it might cost to trust him back. Saturday evening, Maya stood in her apartment in front of her closet and had another minor existential crisis. She had nothing to wear to a corporate holiday party. Or rather, she had many things to wear, but none of them felt right for the person she was trying to be. Priya appeared in the doorway with the efficiency of a woman who had been waiting for this exact moment. "We're going shopping," Priya announced. "And while we shop, you're going to tell me why you're crying about your closet when what you're really crying about is a very handsome CEO." "I'm not," Maya started. "You are," Priya interrupted. "Come on. There's a boutique in Soho that has the kind of dresses that make you feel like the main character of your own life instead of a supporting character in someone else's story." By the time evening arrived, Maya was wearing a dress in deep emerald green that fit her like it had been designed specifically for her body. Her hair was down. Her makeup was bold. She looked in the mirror and saw not the woman she had been before, the one who had been erased, but a new version of herself, someone who had survived something terrible and was still standing. She walked into the holiday party at a private venue in Manhattan, and the first person she saw was Ethan Foster. He was talking to someone from the finance department, but the moment he saw her, he stopped mid-sentence. His eyes tracked her across the room with an intensity that was probably visible to at least 17 other people. Maya made a decision. She walked over to him, excused the person from finance, and took his hand. "I want to try," she said simply. "I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if I'm ready for this, but I want to try, because the one thing I've learned from the past 6 months is that hiding doesn't save you. And you've been brave enough to tell me the truth, so I'm going to be brave enough to try." Ethan's expression shifted into something that looked like carefully restrained joy. "Is this a real conversation, or is this the hot chocolate talking?" "It's a real conversation," Maya said, "but I'm also saying it here, because if I don't say it publicly, I'll spend the next month convincing myself it was a mistake." "In that case," Ethan said, "I'm very glad the hot chocolate was persuasive." He leaned down and kissed her, and it was not a tentative kiss or a questioning kiss. It was a kiss that tasted like vindication, like the possibility of a future, like the knowledge that sometimes the world gives you a second chance and you actually get to take it. When they broke apart, at least 30 people were watching them. "We're definitely going to have some HR conversations on Monday," Ethan said. "Probably," Maya agreed, "but it will be worth it." January arrived in New York like a person returning to a place they had hated. The holidays had passed in a blur of company parties, family dinners, and stolen moments between Ethan and Maya that felt both electric and delicate, like holding something beautiful that might break if you weren't careful. The new year brought with it new complications, new opportunities, and the kind of cold that made people move through the city like they were wading through something thick and resistant. It also brought the official legal conclusion to the Richard Whitmore situation. On a Tuesday morning, in a conference room on the 24th floor of Tech Venture Corp, the settlement papers were signed. Richard would receive a severance package and a non-disclosure agreement that essentially meant he could never work in the tech industry again without facing immediate legal consequences. The company would issue a formal apology to Maya and restore her professional reputation through a series of carefully worded press releases. And Maya would receive a settlement amount that was substantial enough to change her life in concrete, tangible ways. When the lawyers had left and the papers had been filed, Ethan closed the conference room door and looked at Maya across the table. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it. You survived it all and came out the other side as yourself." "We did it," Maya corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone." "That's true," Ethan said. He came around the table and pulled her up out of her chair, wrapping his arms around her. She could feel his heartbeat against her chest, steady and real. "But you had to be the one willing to walk back into this building. You had to be the one willing to face the people who had wronged you. I just made it possible. You did the actual hard work." They stood there for a moment, holding each other in the midst of legal victory, and Maya realized that this was what she had been missing during her 6 months of invisibility, the feeling of being held, of being anchored to another person, of not having to carry everything alone. "I need to tell you something," she said, pulling back slightly to look at him. "And I need you to understand that I'm telling you this not as your girlfriend, but as your director of strategic development." "That sounds ominous," Ethan said. "It's not ominous. It's actually good news, but it's important." Maya took a breath. "I've been thinking about the company's future trajectory, about what we could do with the right strategic direction. And I have an idea, but it's going to require significant investment and a lot of faith in my ability to execute it." "Tell me," Ethan said, settling into a chair and pulling her down to sit next to him. Maya spent the next 45 minutes outlining her vision. She talked about expanding the company's product line in directions that nobody had considered. She talked about building partnerships with smaller companies that had innovative ideas but no resources to scale them. She talked about creating an ecosystem around the company's core product that would make them not just a platform, but a community. "It's ambitious," she said when she finished. "It's going to require taking risks. And if it doesn't work, it could damage the company's reputation. But if it works," Ethan said slowly, "it could make Tech Venture Corp into something genuinely transformative." "Yes," Maya said. Ethan stood up and walked to the window, looking out over Manhattan. The city was grey and cold and infinite in its complexity. He turned back to look at her. "I'm going to propose this to the board," he said, "and I'm going to tell them that it was your idea, and I'm going to push for the investment and the resources you need to make it happen. And if they say no, I'm going to figure out how to do it anyway." "That's incredibly supportive," Maya said. "That's me being in love with you," Ethan said. "It makes me stupid about things like trusting your judgment and wanting to help you succeed. You should probably be concerned about my objectivity." "I am," Maya said. "But I'm also pretty sure your judgment is actually good, and I trust you to tell me when you think I'm making a mistake." "I'll tell you," he promised, "and you'll probably ignore me because you're stubborn. But I'll tell you anyway." The following weeks were a study in controlled chaos. Maya began assembling a team to work on her strategic vision. She conducted market research. She analyzed competitor data. She built financial models that showed various scenarios for implementation and growth. She worked from her office on the executive floor, surrounded by people who treated her with respect instead of invisibility, who valued her opinion instead of stealing her ideas. And she did all of this while also trying to figure out how to be in a relationship with Ethan Foster without it affecting their professional dynamic. This was harder than she had expected. There were moments when they would be in a meeting together, and he would look at her and she would have to actively focus on not smiling. There were moments when she would walk into his office to present data, and he would stand up to greet her like she was the most important person in his day, which made it very hard to maintain the illusion that they were just colleagues. There were moments when they would work late into the evening, and he would order takeout, and they would eat it, sitting on the floor of the conference room, talking about things that had nothing to do with work, and everything to do with the kind of intimacy that came from sharing your life with someone. In late January, Priya cornered her in their apartment and asked the question that Maya had been avoiding. "So, are you actually happy?" Priya asked bluntly. "Like, genuinely happy? Or are you just telling yourself that everything is fine because you're afraid to examine it too closely?" Maya considered lying. But she was tired of lies, tired of narratives that other people had created for her, tired of hiding who she actually was. "I'm happy," she said. "I'm also terrified. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. I keep thinking that this is too good to be true, that Ethan is going to wake up one day and realize he could do better than a woman who nearly disappeared from the world because she couldn't handle failure. But he won't," Priya said, "because he's not an idiot, and he clearly sees you for what you actually are, which is brilliant and capable and kind and someone who is worth knowing. You need to stop comparing your actual life to the worst-case scenario in your head." "I know," Maya said. "Logically, I know that. But emotionally," Priya said, "you're still the person who got destroyed by someone she trusted, and now you're terrified that it's going to happen again." "Yes," Maya admitted. "So maybe you should talk to someone about that," Priya suggested. "Like a therapist. Because Ethan is great, but he can't fix your trauma. Only you can do that, and he can support you while you do it. But he can't actually do the work." Maya had been avoiding therapy the way she had been avoiding a lot of things, by pretending it wasn't necessary, by telling herself she was fine, by operating under the assumption that if she didn't acknowledge the damage, it wouldn't exist. But sitting on her apartment couch in Queens, listening to her roommate dispense wisdom with the confidence of someone who had never had her entire professional identity destroyed, Maya realized that Priya was right. She made an appointment with a therapist for the following week. The therapy sessions became a weekly ritual. Every Tuesday at 6 o'clock, Maya sat in an office that smelled like expensive candles and cost money she was only now able to afford. And she talked about what had happened to her. She talked about the scandal and the humiliation and the specific kind of pain that came from being betrayed by someone you had trusted. She talked about 6 months of invisibility and what it had done to her sense of self. And slowly, week by week, she began to understand that survival was not the same as healing. In late February, almost 3 months after she had started working at Tech Venture Corp again, Ethan asked her to move in with him. They were in his apartment in Manhattan, a place she had only been a handful of times, a space that was beautiful and impersonal in the way that rich people's apartments often were. Floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive art that looked like it had been chosen by a decorator rather than a person, a kitchen that had probably never been used for actual cooking. "I know this is fast," he said, which was a funny way to start a conversation, given that they had known each other for 4 months, 3 of which she had spent cleaning up after him. "I know we're still figuring things out, but I want to know if you would consider it." "Why?" Maya asked, not because she was considering saying no, but because she wanted to understand the reasoning. "Because I want to wake up next to you," Ethan said simply. "Because I want to know that you're going to be there in my kitchen when I'm making terrible coffee. Because I think it's time we stop pretending that this is temporary, or that we're just seeing how it goes. I'm not interested in how it goes. I'm interested in building something with you." Maya considered this. She thought about her apartment in Queens, about the life she had rebuilt in the months of invisibility. She thought about the risk of moving in with someone, of letting another person become that essential to her daily existence. "I need to finish therapy first," she said. "I need to make sure that I'm not doing this because I'm grateful to you or because I'm running away from something. I need to do this because I actually want to." "That's very mature," Ethan said. "Also, I already knew that was what you would say, but I wanted to ask anyway." "You were very confident that I would say yes eventually," Maya observed. "I was," he agreed, "because I believe in the possibility of you choosing to stay, and I think that's worth waiting for." By early March, 2 major things happened simultaneously. The first was that Maya completed a draft of her strategic vision document. It was comprehensive, detailed, and represented hundreds of hours of research and analysis. She presented it to the board of directors, and this time the response was not just positive, it was enthusiastically supportive. The board approved the budget. They gave her the resources she needed. They gave her the authority to hire a team and to begin implementation immediately. Richard Whitmore's sabotage, it turned out, had one significant positive outcome. It had forced the company to completely reimagine its future. And the new future that Maya was building looked nothing like what they had been doing before. The second thing that happened was that Maya realized she was ready. She was sitting in her therapist's office on a Tuesday afternoon, talking about whether she should move in with Ethan, when Dr. Chen, her therapist, a woman in her 60s who had a remarkable ability to listen without judgment, asked her a simple question. "What are you afraid of?" she asked. "That I'm going to lose him," Maya said. "That something is going to happen and he's going to see who I really am and decide I'm not worth the trouble." "And who are you really?" Dr. Chen asked. Maya thought about this. She thought about the woman she had been before, ambitious and talented, and ultimately naive about the ways that power and betrayal operated in the corporate world. She thought about the woman she had been during those 6 months, invisible and broken, and so afraid of being seen that she had essentially become a ghost. And she thought about the woman she was now, someone who had been destroyed and had rebuilt herself, someone who had learned what it meant to survive, someone who was brave enough to try. "I'm someone who survived something terrible," she said. "And I'm someone who learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. And I'm someone who deserves good things, even though I spent a lot of time believing I didn't." "Do you think Ethan Foster is a good thing?" Dr. Chen asked. "Yes," Maya said. "I think he might be the best thing that's happened to me." "Then perhaps it's time to trust that," Dr. Chen said. On a Saturday in early March, Maya went to Ethan's apartment with 2 large suitcases and a decision that felt like it had taken her entire life to make. He opened the door and found her standing there, luggage in hand, looking terrified and determined in equal measure. "I'm moving in," she said, "not because I'm grateful and not because I'm running away from anything. I'm moving in because I want to see what happens when we stop being careful with each other and just actually try to build something real." Ethan picked her up and spun her around, and she could feel him smiling against her hair. "I'm so in love with you," he said. "It's probably going to annoy you at some point, but I want you to know that right now it's the truest thing I feel." "I'm in love with you too," Maya said, and it was strange and terrifying and exactly right, which is probably going to scare me at some point, but I'm going to try not to let the fear win. 6 months later, in September, Maya was sitting in a conference room with the executive team of Tech Venture Corp, reviewing the results of the strategic initiative that she had spent months planning and implementing. The numbers were extraordinary. User engagement had increased by 43%. The new partnership ecosystem had attracted 5 significant partners and was projected to attract 15 more by year-end. The company's market valuation had tripled, and the investment community was paying very close attention to what Tech Venture Corp was doing under the direction of a CEO who trusted his team and a strategic director who had been resurrected from professional oblivion. When the meeting ended, Ethan walked her to her office and closed the door behind them. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small box out of his pocket. Maya's heart stopped. "Before you panic," he said quickly, "I know we haven't talked about marriage. I know it's fast. But I also know that I'm never going to feel more certain about anything than I feel about you, and I didn't want to wait for some arbitrary moment that felt more convenient. I just wanted to ask you if you could imagine spending the rest of your life with me, knowing what you know about me, knowing what you know about yourself, knowing what we know about what's possible when you trust someone." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, nothing ostentatious or dramatic, just something elegant and beautiful and exactly right. "I'm not asking for an answer right now," he said. "I'm just asking you to think about the possibility." Maya took the box from his hand and looked at the ring. She thought about 6 months ago, when she had been invisible. She thought about the moment Ethan had recognized her. She thought about every conversation since then, every moment of vulnerability, every instance of choosing to trust, when trust had cost her everything before. "Yes," she said. "Yes." "You'll think about it?" Ethan asked. "Yes, I'll marry you," Maya said, "because I've spent enough time being careful. Because I know what I want now. And because the one thing I learned from being destroyed is that the only thing worth building with is someone who actually sees you." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, which seemed like a metaphor for something. But Maya decided not to overthink it. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," she replied. And outside the window of her office on the executive floor of Tech Venture Corp, Manhattan sprawled in all its complicated glory, a city where people disappear and reappear, where careers are made and destroyed, where second chances are rare enough that you have to grab them with both hands and hold on for dear life. Maya Harrison had been invisible for 6 months, and in those 6 months, she had learned that the world didn't actually care whether you existed or not, but people did. The right people did. And that made all the difference. She looked at the ring on her hand, at the man who had seen her when she was trying so hard not to be seen, and she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future that included joy. It was, she decided, more than enough. Epilogue. 1 year later, on a perfect September afternoon, Maya stood in a park in Manhattan and watched as Ethan Foster walked toward her in a suit that probably cost more than her first month's salary at Tech Venture Corp. The guest list was small, just family, close friends, and the people who had mattered during the journey from destruction to reconstruction. Priya was there, crying in a way that suggested she had never doubted for a moment that this would happen. Dr. Chen was there, sitting quietly in the back, looking satisfied with the knowledge that her patient had learned to trust again. The ceremony was brief and funny and genuinely touching. The vows focused not on promises of perfection, but on promises to show up, to try, to choose each other even when it was hard. When it was over, and they were officially married, Ethan kissed her in a way that made it very clear that this was not a business arrangement or a strategic alliance. This was a choice made freely, made knowingly, made with full awareness of all the ways it could go wrong, and the decision to build it anyway. As they walked back down the aisle, which was more of a path through the park, but symbolism wasn't everything, Maya caught sight of her reflection in a window of the nearby building. She saw a woman in a white dress holding flowers, looking happy in a way that was uncomplicated and genuine. She saw herself, finally, completely, undeniably herself. And that, she thought, was the greatest possible ending to the story that had nearly broken her. Not because everything was perfect now. Life was never perfect, and anyone who told you otherwise was lying. But because she had survived the worst of it, and she had come out the other side still herself, better actually, stronger, more certain of what she wanted and why. The scandal that had destroyed her had also taught her something invaluable, that your value as a human being had nothing to do with what other people said about you, and everything to do with what you believed about yourself. She had learned that invisibility could save you, but only visibility could actually let you live. And she had learned that sometimes, if you were extraordinarily lucky, the person who saw you first, really saw you, beneath all the defensive layers and careful constructions, would love you, not despite your damage, but because they understood what it had taken to survive it. As sunset painted Manhattan in shades of gold and pink, Maya Harrison Foster took her husband's hand and walked into whatever came next, knowing that for the first time in a very long time, she was ready for it. The woman in the mop closet was gone, but the woman who had survived being in the mop closet was still here, brighter and stronger and infinitely more real. And that, she thought as she looked up at Ethan and saw her future reflected in his eyes, was exactly as it should be. If you loved Maya's journey, if you believed in her comeback, hit that subscribe button. We create realistic romance stories that touch your heart. Don't miss our next series.